I'd like to invite the panelists this morning for Natural Capitalism. This is so appropriate because it is the 10th year anniversary of the publication of Natural Capitalism, authored by Paul Hawken, Amory Lovins, and Hunter Lovins. And we're delighted to have Paul join us this morning. So coming on the stage, we have Michael Potts, our CEO at RMI, Paul Hawken, Ray Anderson, Janine Benyus, Amory Lovins, and Carl Bass. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. So you've met Michael Potts, our CEO. I'm just going to say briefly that we are delighted to have him at RMI. He comes to RMI, actually he's been here for a little over 2 years now, with 25 years experience as a high-tech executive. He was the CEO of American Fundware, a company that tripled in revenues during his tenure and produced the award-winning Fundware software product that was for nonprofit and governmental entities. In addition to his work at RMI with us, he also sits on various nonprofit and for-profit boards. Now I'd like to do something a little fun, introducing the rest of this panel. This is so extraordinary, one, for me to just be on the same stage with these folks, and it's like old RMI home week up here right now. I was thinking what would be fun, and I want you to join in with me, but one of the things that Amory and RMI is really good at is connecting the dots. There are so many lines that you could draw among and between this group up here. It's pretty fascinating. So I thought we would start there. Paul, at the age of 20, dedicated his life to sustainability. Amory, at the age of 21, was the youngest Don at Oxford. Janine, of course, is young. Oh, and by the way, Janine and Carl are the same age. Did you know? That was probably more information than you.
Are we?
Janine calls herself a nature nerd. Amory has now admitted that he walks around the earth with full frontal nerdity. Ray read Paul's book in 1993, The Ecology of Commerce, and has what he calls now a spear in the chest epiphany. That book, written in 1993, was the same year, actually, that Carl became the CEO of Autodesk. Autodesk is the leader of 2D and 3D design software for buildings, construction, engineering. Paul founded and co-founded some software companies. That goes back to Michael, whose background is in software. Ray invited Janine, Amory, and Paul, among others, to be on the dream team for Interface. Janine likes, as a biologist, to be at the design table. Amory this year has been named the Design Mind by Cooper Hewitt Museum, and we'll be accepting that award later this month. Ray's book, and Ray has written several books, and by the way, there have been 40 books authored by the folks on this stage. Amory wins that contest of the number of books. Ray's book, Confessions of a Radical Industrialist, leads us right into the conversation about this book, Natural Capitalism, the Next Industrial Revolution. All of you sit on various boards, and I'm sure bring great asset. Carl, on his own board, of course, Autodesk, and on McAfee. Ray on RMI, thank you, Ray, and Georgia Conservancy, among others. Paul has been on the advisory board of New American Dream and lots of other advisory boards and for-profit boards. Janine used to sit on RMI's board and has her own Biomimicry Institute, as well as her Biomimicry LLC that she founded and is president of. And Ray and Paul are both advisors to Janine's Biomimicry Institute. And it goes on, frankly. If I've missed any major connective dots, let me know. Anything else you can, or that you would not be embarrassed to say on the
Paul
stage?
and I have been working with Bill Ford for a few years.
That's
Yeah,
right.
we're on
And
that
of course,
track
I met Ray through Paul.
today.
And I met Ray through Paul.
Oh, interesting.
And Carl's Autodesk supports RMI and the Biomimicry Institute.
That's right.
That's right.
That's true.
And Autodesk is going to be a partner in our Factor 10 engineering project. And there have actually been some spin-off dots. Carl was CEO of a spin-off of Autodesk, BuzzSaw.com. I love that name. Amory was the chairman of one of our spin-offs, Hypercar, which is now FiberForge for some time. And Michael was involved with another spin-off, Bright Automotive of RMI. So I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation as it interweaves among all those connections and celebrates the 10-year anniversary of natural capitalism. Welcome again. Thank you all.
And thank you for attending this panel discussion. My biggest concern this morning is with this excess of IQ, we may cause some kind of a nuclear event here. But
Ray,
we'll work through
We
that.
should push back a little.
The focus of this discussion...
That's why we have a moderator.
Good, yeah, good. Yes. Isn't it great to be the person bringing down the average?
So maybe
If I can change the subject now.
we should push our chairs back a little so that we can.
Quickly,
so we can
the center of
see
this
each other a little
discussion
bit better.
is natural capitalism. And there was a book published 10 years ago now called Natural Capitalism, which was a landmark book that not only had great content, but it also served, I think, as a watershed in the thinking of our country. A few of the reviews are the Economist said that natural capitalism leaves every reader with the hope that the old battle between business and the environment can reach a peaceful and constructive conclusion. It was translated into, I believe, 12 languages. That's right. There's a new edition about to come out. Bill Clinton called it one of the 5 most important books that he had ever read. More importantly, Ashton Kutcher said it was the best book he's read on sustainable employment. So what we're going to do, that's when you've made the big time. So what we're going to do with this esteemed panel is give them a chance to fill us in on their views of natural capitalism at this time. So we're going to do 3 to 5 minutes each just for them to fill us in on their current views, and then we're going to go through some other questions. And I'd like to start with Paul.
It's really a pleasure to be here and to have this level of literacy in the audience. And I know I can speak for everybody on that level, because you have to adjust, who you're speaking, what you say to who you're speaking. And so I feel like we can just cut loose today. And if we talk too fast, raise your hand. We can't see you anyway because of the lights, but you can raise your hand. And Michael, when we first spoke about this, asked about sort of the origins of natural capitalism. So I thought I'd do that in a real, kind of 90-second overview. It really happened in 1994, and I had the College of Commerce come out, and I was giving talks about it over and over and over again. And I get tired of hearing myself, and because you say the same thing over and over again. And I had to give a speech at the California Academy of Science here in San Francisco. And I was sort of noodling it and thinking about it. And I was reading Herman Daly at that time. And Herman Daly talked about the sort of the oddity and the idiocy, if you will, of a system that maximized the productivity of what we had more and more of, and basically, and used what we had less and less of to do so, which is how to use more and more resources to make people more productive, thereby creating basically unemployment and a degraded environment. And it really was using the term natural capital, which is coined by E.F. Schumacher in Small is Beautiful, to get, in a sense, nature on the balance sheet so that it had value before it was cut, extracted, drilled, or destroyed, the idea emerged right there. It's just like in seconds about really all the principles and the origin of natural capitalism. So I gave that speech that night, and it was a horrible speech because, you know, it was just, the ideas were sort of swimming in my head, very disorganized. But that really was the origin of it. And the 4 principles of natural capitalism are so simple. They're really common sense. And even though the second principle is really biomimetics and biomimicry, the principles themselves are biomimicry. I mean, that's what they are. And the first one basically is just use less, you know, it's radical resource productivity. In other words, to radically reduce the throughput in the industrial system. And the second one is to change what is in the throughput, that is to say, the materials themselves, which is using ambient temperature, green chemistry, biomimetics. And the third one is to have an economy in which business and consumers have convergent incentives. That is to say, they're not perverse incentives. So to get into solutions economy, wherein you actually keep your stuff and sell the service, and then your stuff comes back the way Ray's doing at Interface. And the fourth thing is basically to make more stuff that we're running out of, which is to increase natural capitalism, which really involves a lot of mechanisms, including intergenerational financing and so forth, in a sense, to basically, rather than borrow in order to steal the future and sell in the present, is to really to create financing mechanisms to heal the future and call that GDP instead of what we're destroying. And so that's really the 4 principles, and that was really the origin of natural capitalism. So 1994, and then there was an article in Mother Jones in 96, and then the book came out in 99. So there's my more than 90 seconds. You're welcome.
Great, thanks. Ray, could you share your thoughts?
I want to jump straight into Janine's work, Biomimicry, and make 2 points. When I read her book, I got to the last chapter. It was on how would nature design an industrial system. And she described interface, not ever having met anybody or known anything about interface. She described interface. Well, that was impressive enough. But when our head of design read her book, it was to him what Paul's book had been to me. It was, you know, an epiphanal experience. And he did the most unusual thing. He sent his design team into the forest and said, go and see how nature would design a floor covering. And don't come back with leaf designs, he said, you know. Come back with nature's design principles. Well, this is an outrageous, ridiculous assignment. But the design team spent a day in the forest looking at the ground, you know, the forest floor, the stream beds, and it finally dawned on them, there are no 2 things alike here. No 2 sticks, no 2 stones, no 2 leaves, no 2 limbs, no 2 anything alike. There's chaos here, yet there's a pleasant orderliness in this chaos. So they came back to the design studio, designed a carpet tile. That's what we do. We make carpet tiles, modular carpet. Designed a carpet tile such that the face designs of no 2 tiles were the same. They were all similar, but every one was uniquely different from all the others. And introduced this product into the marketplace as Entropy, the name Entropy. And in a year and a half, it went to the top of the bestseller list, faster than any other product ever had in the company's history. And in time became perhaps the single best-selling product ever in the commercial carpet industry. Well, it turns out there were all kinds of advantages. There was the fact that in production there was practically no off quality. Inspectors could not find defects among this deliberate imperfection of no 2 alike. The installers could install tiles very, very quickly because they didn't have to worry about getting the pile nap all running uniformly. The more random the installation, the better. Then the user could actually replace the damaged tile without that sore thumb effect. If everything looks the same and you put a new among the old, it stands out like a sore thumb, but not so with Entropy. You cannot find the new among the old. And which then enabled the users to actually rotate the carpet tiles on the floor the way you would the tires on your automobile. And all of that, of course, extends the useful life of the product, resource efficiency at work. But then I wondered if there's not more to explain the success of Entropy. And then I heard of a speaker on the environmental speaking circuit who who begins every speech by having her audience close their eyes and picture in their mind's eye that ideal comfort zone, that ideal place of peace and repose, tranquility, serenity. We might try it here. Humor me. Everybody, close your eyes and in your mind's eye, picture your ideal place of peace and repose and tranquility, serenity, creativity, comfort, your perfect comfort zone. Have you got it? Now lift your hands high if you're somewhere outdoors. Now look around.
Yeah.
Look around. It's amazing. We humans, more than 90% of us gravitate to nature for that ideal comfort zone, and somehow I believe entropy brings outdoors indoors, and that is its real appeal. Thank you, Janine, for biomimicry.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Ray, for putting it into actual practice, applied nature nerdism. So yeah, it's been a real delight for me. I basically did a reportage in 1997 of a small signal that was happening in the scientific literature, in which there was this big shift going on from just learning about nature to actually learning from nature. There's a big difference there. The journals are full of descriptions of the natural world. But then there were this crazy group of people who were actually trying to emulate what they saw. And I've just been following the story ever since. I started picking up on it in about 1990. What's happening now in biomimicry is astounding. And it has to do with the fact that it's actually starting to be applied. It's jumped out of academia. It's still happening in academia, for sure. But now it's happening in industrial R&D labs, and it's happening in private design firms, and it's happening in architecture firms. Okay, so it's much more in real time, looking to the natural world for inspiration. And I think biomimicry is in its commercialization phase. What's happening is that we're beginning to understand certain effects in the natural world. And those are leading to, they're the extraordinarily ubiquitous things that biologists know about, but that wind up being platform technologies. So for instance, most leaves are self-cleaning. It has to do with a nano-rough surface that causes water to ball up and lift dirt away. That's now called the lotus effect. And that's been moved now into about a dozen different product lines, everything from roofing tiles to paint to fabrics that are self-cleaning without detergent. That's a very common pattern in the natural world. Or the spiraling pattern that you see in seashells. This is the first time I met Amory. I don't know if you remember this. I came to RMI, and there was a house party. And Amory waddles in and says, this is nerd to nerd. I mean, he's got a good wobble. Have you ever seen him? I mean, he moves. He came in, and you brought me to the kitchen. And he had a seashell. He had a seashell that was cut in half. He was showing me this spiral. And that is the geometric form that's now in pack streamlining technology and in fans. Again, an effect. Just went down to San Diego, 300 people in the room. San Diego wants to be a biomimicry hub. This is another thing that's happening, a commercialization hub. It was one of 6 places in the world that I've recently visited in the last 2 months that want to be biomimicry hubs, meaning commercialization hubs. And sitting on the business panel was somebody from Qualcomm who is doing a low-power display based on structural color, which is what butterflies have. It's actually, no pigment, but rather structure causing the color to your eye through refractance. And somebody sitting at the table who is making a way to remove the $36 billion used in freezers right now to freeze vaccines and other biologicals by mimicking the way a little tardigrade, and brine shrimp basically conserve their own DNA in a dried out condition. That's an effect called anhydrobiosis. So there's the structural color effect, the anhydrobiosis effect, and these are platform technologies. The next step that I'll talk about later in this panel maybe is this move towards nature, not just as model, but nature as measure to give us aspirational goals. But let's talk about that come back to that one.
Will do. Thank you. Carl.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a real honor to be amongst all the people. And as I thought about it, I thought it's a great honor, and it's also a great disappointment to be here. And let me tell you why it was a great disappointment. What this morning reminds me of is when I went to college many years ago. I guess the same time Janine went to college, I now know. When I went to college many years ago, I had this class that was early in the morning. It's when I first encountered the work of Amory, and read all the other books of the time, Limits to Growth and Silent Spring and those kind of books. And I'd have this class in the morning, and then I'd walk out, and the next class I had was a class where the professor was Nobel Prize winning scientist Hans Bethe. And Hans Bethe never met a problem that he didn't think could be solved with nuclear energy. And so despite all the phenomenal work I saw in the morning, the next class was always about why we really didn't need to do anything. And I have a little bit of that same sense of disappointment, that nostalgic disappointment here again. There's a room of people doing phenomenally interesting work, and yet you go out and there's another class filled with Hans Bethes. And
Only not as smart.
he's not nearly as smart. He was hard to argue with.
Well, I once did successfully in foreign affairs.
Exactly. So let me just tell you a little bit about what my connection to this is and Autodesk's connection to this is, which is we make software for people to design stuff. If you look at most of the stuff in the world, most of the stuff designed by people, at some point it touches our software. So there's millions, maybe tens of millions of people who use our software to design and engineer things. And this is buildings and bridges and tunnels. It's cars and airplanes and consumer products. And I've found several observations over the last couple of years about people who are doing design and people who are more interested in doing it in environmentally sensitive, sustainable ways. The first observation I finally reached is that there's a level of awareness out there where people actually care. And I recently went to Washington, D.C. I also went to Sacramento. And when you get there and you realize that people are aware of the problem, you now know that on average, people are aware that there's a problem, because if the people in D.C. and the people in Sacramento get it, the rest of the world gets it. So it's no longer a question of desire. Second thing I found out is that most people who are working in these fields, these are the people I interact with every day, don't actually know what to do. Or at least many of them don't know what to do. And unfortunately, I've run this experiment way too many times where somebody shows me the latest building, the latest LEED certified building, and you'd ask a simple question. If you took that building and rotated it 10 degrees on its site, would it use more energy to heat or cool? Most people give you kind of a blank stare. You ask them, if you put 10% more glazing on that side of the building, would it use more energy to heat and cool? They don't know the answer. If I made the eaves 2 feet longer, what would be the effect? And the truth is, if you do design, if you don't have good intuition, it's really hard to do good design in engineering. And so if you can't answer simple questions, that's a real problem. The other thing I've seen is there's a real lack of information available. So for example, we have people who design consumer products and phones and MP3 players. They go and they look, and they choose a plastic. Well, there's a couple thousand plastics to choose from. They don't have the information about which material to choose. It's staggering that they don't, but in the way that industry often works, they do what the last one did. It's rare where they go out and really understand the implications of their choices. And the last one I'd say that I've seen is the clean tech industry in general greatly underutilizes information technology. And so the things that we're trying to do and the things that I've been involved in, really just two things trying to do. One is give people tools so they can better understand the design decisions that they're making. You know, design is this iterative process. You try something, you test it, you try it, you test it. You know, in the world of buildings, everything's a one-off. There are no prototypes. In the world of manufacturing, at least you get to build a prototype. What we're trying to do with both buildings and manufactured products is give people the ability to build digital prototypes so they can understand the thing they're building, they can experience it before they actually have to commit to building it. And nowadays, it's all totally understandable. So, you know, our main goal is to try to give people tools because they're now sufficiently motivated, they understand what they're trying to accomplish, but the worst thing they can possibly do is commit the capital and the resources and the time and effort to do it and end up with the wrong result. So it's all about building digital prototypes. And I'd say the second thing what we're really trying to do is, if you look out there, and there's phenomenal work being done by the people on this panel, but if you think about it, the demand curve for energy for the next 25 years is actually not being created by the people on the panel. It's being created by the millions of people who are designing and engineering things every day, the people who are making those decisions. People here can be the thought leaders, they can show people the way, and what I think the interaction here is that software is a vehicle to take the ideas of people like Amory and Janine and Paul and bring those ideas to scale so that the millions of people who are doing it actually have a positive effect on the demand curve for the future.
Thanks, Carl.
Yep.
Okay.
Amory.
Let me go on from there. I think there are at least two great design revolutions going on. One is the one that Janine is driving, designing things the way nature does, with closed loops, no waste, no toxicity, elegant frugality. And it's wonderful to see how that is now really taking off as businesses discover that the 3.8 billion years, as Janine says, of design genius outside these walls has already solved most of our problems if we just know which organisms to ask. So she's organizing the biological literature in a new way around function, not organism. So you can find out who's already solved your problem and where's the literature on how they do it and who are the innovators who are imitating how they do it. The other great design revolution is one that we're trying to drive at RMI through our Factor 10 Engineering, or 10xe project at 10xe.org. And that's what we call integrative design, optimizing whole systems for multiple benefits, not isolated components for single benefits. And the result of that is that you end up with very large energy, water, materials, other resource savings, costing less than if you'd set out to save little or nothing. Classic case being, say, saving around 92% of the pumping energy in a heat transfer loop in one of Ray's factories by using fat, short, straight pipes instead of skinny, long, crooked pipes. And the reason we have crooked pipes and a lot of right angle bends is it's easy to draw, but of course with Carl's software, that does the drawing. Doesn't matter if we write the software properly. So wouldn't it be neat if that software were to guide you to do fat, short, straight pipes and be your coach? Pumping happens to be the biggest use of electricity, and the second biggest is fans, which have the same physics, and the fan and duct systems are designed with the same kind of software. And gee, if we get that right, we've just affected half of motor use, and motors use 3/5 of the world's electricity, and making electricity releases about 2/5 of the fossil carbon. Not only that, but say if you're making efficient buildings with tools that let you actually see the consequences of your choice and expand the range of your choice that might not otherwise occur to you. Buildings use 70% of our electricity in this country, and every unit of electricity you saves about 4 units of fuel at the power plant, and half that fuel is coal. Huge leverage for changing what's going on in the designer's head because you changed what's on the screen with the design tool. So that's an amazing opportunity to go to scale with the kind of scaling and network effects that we are now familiar with through software. So I suppose that means on top of the 2 design innovations, design revolutions in biomimicry and integrative design, there's another layer of IT that could help us do a lot more, a lot faster. Now, I don't know of any tool like that yet for scaling the sort of thing Ray's introduced. Ray plays with a full deck at interface. He deals with all 4 kinds of capital, not just 2, money and goods, but also people and nature. If you play with a full deck, you make more money, have more fun, do more good. But Ray's trying to influence the world by showing phenomenal business results while eliminating waste and harm. But that's a slow slog, and I think he is having the influence hoped for in much bigger companies like his suppliers, the DuPonts and ICIs and so on in the world. But there aren't enough Rays out there. So we've always, at RMI, tried to help early adopters in a given sector. We've worked in about 29 sectors so far to get so conspicuously successful as natural capitalists and radical resource savers that their rivals are forced by competitive pressure to follow suit or lose market share. This is fun, it works, but it doesn't work as fast as we would like. So we're trying to figure out, and we need your help in this, how to gain the mathematics of networks, how to make the principles of natural capitalism into beneficial social viruses that spread exponentially. And we're still working on that one, although I think we're all starting to see more ways to do it. Maybe that's where our panel can go to figure out how to amplify and scale.
Thank you, Amory. I want to move the discussion forward. And the natural capitalism did rest on 4 fundamental principles, but the book is very rich with specific examples and applications. So I'd like to ask the panel to talk about what elements of the book or what promises did the book put forth that have really paid off? What are some of the things that we think have gotten great traction since the book came out? Paul, do you have anything that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I feel like the book, the principles are really common sense. So I have a little different attitude. I don't have any ownership of them or like somehow we created these principles. It's more like pointing to a woodpecker in a tree and saying, wow, look at that. And, but it didn't make the woodpecker, you know. And so from my point of view, it's hard to say, it's hard for me to say, well, okay, natural capitalism, so it was derivative and therefore, you know, it spreads out from there. I think it was printed, published at a time when, I mean, the book is doing better now than it did 10 years ago, so it has, it was a little bit ahead of its time in terms of the readiness of the readership, you know. So in terms of the principles, the one that people gravitate to is, you know, resource productivity because it is the one that has the most immediate payback. When you hear stories like Ray with Entropy, the carpet, which is, you know, a huge percentage of their sales now. I don't know if you're free to say it, but I mean, you don't hear those stories. You don't get those people kind of going that next step, you know, in the sense of having the designers walk out into the forest and say, design me a carpet. That there's still a lot of fear in the corporate world, and it's really like, okay, if we're going to do sustainability, we've got to show a bottom line right away. And that always is going to go to resource productivity, right? Because that's where the money's lying on the floor. And it doesn't go to design so quickly. It doesn't go to systems integration. And I know all of us, and you could probably talk about this later, but have been really confronting the fact that the frustration of dealing with large corporations and people and, jumping up and down, holding a sign, we'll work for food, and, but kind of things, they could save literally tens of millions of dollars, and really people say, oh gosh, it's really not my department, and I'm busy, and I don't have anybody under me, you have to go to see so-and-so, and you go, oh my God, I mean, the ice caps are melting, and it's like, God, I don't have a budget for that. And so you really run into huge structural problems the way business is organized. And one of the problems is that the supply chains now are so deeply furrowed, put it that way, and in terms of big corporations. And you come, I have some Lotus, type of material, Lotus coating, or this or this, a new material does this, it's made at ambient temperature, it'll save you money, and they just go, I can't deal with that. Does DuPont make it? Does Dow make it? No, they don't. Oh, I'm sorry, that's our supplier. So on one hand, the uptake is definitely where the lowest hanging fruit is, which is a term which I detest because I grew up in the valley, and my grandfather grew fruit, and we had orchards, and I thought, what this lowest hanging fruit stuff, It's an orchard, for God's sake.
Sometimes it's a rotten fruit.
Yeah, I know. but I do feel like that on the positive side, what I think that NatCap did, and as did many other things, is that the literacy that you see now in policy in corporate America and so forth is unbelievable compared to what it was 10 years ago. So the level of conversation, the level of the sustainability quotient, the SQ, is really quite extraordinary. And that has really changed the quality of the conversation, the level of the conversation. And even if people are shrugging their shoulders, at least they know what you're talking about. And whereas before 10 years, they just said, who let him in and when's my next appointment? And so there's been a real shift, in terms of that. I say, at Walmart, I was talking to these guys about water and toilets and, waterless urinals, which you talked about in NatCap. And these guys knew more about water and urinals, and this is kind of an arcane subject, but hey, it's a men's subject. But they knew more than any NGO I knew of, really, a few years ago. They had just surpassed it because they can save 5 billion gallons a year if they switch to waterless, and for them, that's called money. So again, it reinforces what I was saying about resource productivity.
Carl, what have you seen in the last 10 years? What's picked up traction? What's going well?
I think the awareness of the problem. Despite my kind of dire intro to this, is the fact that people are sufficiently motivated to design things differently. And the conversation that goes on in business all the time, is around, is this idea here to stay? Is sustainable design a long-term thing? Is it just that oil's $100 a barrel?
Is this a passing fad? I've heard that. This is going to come and go, right?
But this is I have people I work with who would tell you that, oil's going to be back at $30 a barrel, and it was fun. It was cute. It's strange to say that, and I think, generally speaking, in the world of architecture, engineering, and construction, people who deal with buildings and infrastructure, their worldview has changed. That they, it's kind of like, when you rent a car at Hertz and it says, do not back up, severe tire damage. People now understand that there's kind of no going back. And so I would say that's the positive one. I would say in the world of manufacturing, where they have more ability to affect this, because the things you make are in the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. If I make just a plastic bottle cap that much thinner or more recyclable, I can have a greater effect. I don't think they've rented the car yet.
Well, Ray, you're right in the space that Carl's referring to, in terms of you're making a product, and no offense, but some people would call it not the most romantic product in the world.
Beg your pardon.
Although for real carpet lovers, you're at the top of the heap.
You don't say that to a carpet.
But how do you talk to your board of directors about this? How committed are they to this? And And since you are a corporation that needs to produce profits, how do you have a conversation that really privileges these other issues?
I'd say there was a fair amount of skepticism early on with our board as well as with all of our people. Nobody knew what this meant, and they basically thought I'd gone around the bend. But in one board meeting, I spent half the board meeting taking the board through Beyond the Limits, Dennis Meadows' book, Beyond the Limits, and those computerized future projections that with only one exception, showed collapse for the economy and people and everything else about the middle of this century, and the only one that showed equilibrium, which is another word for sustainability, was the one where all the right things had happened 20 years before. So in effect, too late. But picking up on something Carl said, Deepak Chopra has this wonderful saying, people are doing the best they can given their level of awareness. So this whole movement is about level of awareness. And the encouraging thing to me is, let me just ask you, have anybody in this audience ever known an ex-environmentalist?
What?
An ex-environmentalist.
Ex-environmentalist. You don't find ex-environmentalists with rare exceptions. I saw one hand up. Because once you get it, you cannot unget it. And I'm pretty sure that all the smart people in the world are not environmentalists, but I do believe all the environmentalists I've ever met were smart people. And there's one other thing. When one of them becomes one of us, there's one less of them and one more of us. And the ratchet goes click, and it never goes back in the other direction. So there's an inevitability about this movement. So back to my board. I took them through that exercise with the book, and there was still skepticism. But as our success developed and unfolded, first in eliminating waste, when we began to rack up huge savings from the low-hanging fruit, and we'd made the decision to divert some of those savings into reinvestment in the rest of this initiative, developing the technologies, researching the technologies, making the process changes and so forth. The waste savings were paying for all of this, so we got ahead of the cost curve right away, and our board loved that, obviously. Even the financial community liked that. And then as the business case itself developed, it became very, very clear that this was not just the right thing to do. It was also very, very smart. So right, so smart. I'll give you the business case in four points. Our costs are down, not up, dispelling that myth. Our products are the best they've ever been, thanks to biomimicry, largely speaking. Our people are galvanized around this shared higher purpose. Maslow said it a long time ago that at the top of the pyramid of human needs is this need for self-actualization, which translates into being part of something bigger than oneself. And our people feel that higher purpose in their work. And then the goodwill of the marketplace has just been amazing. It was interior designers and architects who put us on this course 15 years ago with a simple question: what's your company doing for the environment? A question for which we had no answers at the time, which led me to Paul's book, and the rest is history. But those very same people have embraced the company for what we are doing. So cost, products, people, marketplace. What else is there?
Yeah.
What do you need for a business case? There it is. And our board is totally on board today.
So did you have to get a new board?
One more point here. In our annual report for the year 2000, we were 6 years into this. The tagline on the annual report was "A better way to bigger profits," and we disclosed the whole initiative in that annual report. Yeah.
Well, and in the recent downturn, that customer loyalty and low cost and oil independence has served you extremely well.
the 2001, 2003 downturn also. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to tell a Ray story because there's they teach people now at interface called RAISE, Ray Anderson Institute for Sustainable, what's the E? Enterprise, I'm sorry. Okay, RAISE, anyway, R-A-S-E. But they had Sarah Lee down there and at the plant in LaGrange, and in a conference room, and Jim was there talking, and with about 13, 14 people from Sarah Lee. And then the woman who is the head of the group from Sarah Lee had to go to the loo. And it's not right there. You have to go through the factory floor, and there's like a blue kind of path you walk on to get to where the bathrooms are, because they're actually making carpet right there. And she was walking along, and then a guy with a forklift, African-American, big guy, forklift, big spool of carpet on the lift, came by, and it was like, who's going to go first? He stopped, and and she turned to him and said, what do you do? And he said, I save the earth, man. What do you do?
Yeah.
And there's a guy who's not college educated, and she said, well, what do you mean? And he went, boom, 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 the metrics, what's going on, what he's doing, what it means, and she was querying him, really drilling down. And this is a woman who had been very skeptical to the group in the early morning. And then he said, listen, I got to leave right now because if this thing isn't on that, roll right, in 30 seconds, this is this and this and this is going to happen. Thank you very much, boom, and drove off. And she was like, well, so she came back to the room, and she was a changed woman. And she was one who was driving her staff now to stop being so skeptical about RAISE. And there's questions, Carl, that come up from people about, is this for real?
I have another race story. When we could do this all day. When Paul asked me to come on the Eco Dream Team, which Ray has a green conscience that he brings around him, and this was years ago. This must have been like 1999 or something. And I came and I was basically talking about how what would nature do to grow a carpet at this meeting. And as I heard myself speak, I thought, I sound like an alien. I sound like I am like fresh out of the insane asylum, seriously. Because I was saying, you think about a beetle shell. I mean, it starts as a liquid, it self-assembles, hardens, cures in the air, and becomes colorful in different spots, and it's waterproof, and it's it's resistant to bacteria. And I said, I would see a day when maybe you wouldn't even have any of the roll-to-roll stuff going on in the factory. You literally would drive up with a car to a room like this, and you would pour in a liquid, and the carpet would self-assemble. And perhaps, and I'm looking around going, just don't look at, because everyone's just sort of, and I see them saying, like, note to self, never ask Paul for his advice on consultants. And I'm thinking to myself, I told Paul this was a bad idea. But I'm saying, I was saying, but as it self-assembles, perhaps it'll be in layers, and the light will come through and create the color, so you won't need pigment, because this happens in the natural world, in the beetle shell. To me, it was existence proof. It was already there. And I said, and as far as carbon, there's no reason that you couldn't use CO2 as the source of your carbon. There's a guy in Cornell who's mimicking plants and making plastics out of CO2. Silence. Complete silence. And, which would have cut out, DuPont, and it would have, it would be like they'd be a formulator for this liquid. Ray, everybody was silent, kind of going, and Ray's writing his notes, and he looks down and he goes, you're telling me that we're going to have our carpets self-assembling in a few years? And I said, maybe. And here's the deal. All these years later, really, when you think about it, now you're reading about solar panels that are thin film, that are literally roll-to-roll processes, or sprayed on out of liquid and self-assembling, right? And Paul and I are working on a solar cell right now that's self-assembling at room temperature. Combine the materials, they self-assemble like, Jell-O does in your refrigerator, only it pulls down photons. So the key thing is that when, even though, you know, these are, as Paul said, large corporations have their supply chains in place and their ways of manufacturing in place, but there are some people that are willing to listen to the fact that there might be an entirely new way to do process chemistry. And, you know, and now, actually, the reality has caught up with the possibility. But you were willing to listen to it 9 years ago.
Yeah, but something simple like tactile is such a winner in the market. It's just applying gecko foot technology to a little square that goes under where 4 carpet tiles meet and holds them together in a way you can peel off, but it means you can roll up the whole floor as if it were broadloom, but then lift out any tile that you need to replace. It's a wonderful idea, and what's been the market effect?
Oh, wow, it's revolutionized installation.
Yeah.
And there's no VOCs, there's nothing, and it doesn't stick
No
to the
glue.
floor.
Eliminates glue altogether, yeah.
Yeah, that's gecko.
Yeah.
So Janine, just to ask for your perspective, because it's an interesting contrast in that, in a way, Ray is an industrialist that has gotten access to visionaries to change the way he looks at things. You're a visionary, but you work a lot with industrialists. Mm-hmm. And I guess the question is, are you noticing a difference in the tenor of your conversations? And is there a difference, is it moving beyond the outliers in these organizations that are interested? Are you seeing more the rank and file and the leadership developing more interest in these ideas?
Well, you know, the Biomimicry Guild, we go in as biologists at the design table. And with people like, you know, Boeing and GE, I mean, it's Fortune 50 companies, and Kohler and Herman Miller and Procter & Gamble and General Mills. I mean, this is not, you know, and seventh generation, you know, but it's at that level. And we start as biologists at the design table with the engineering groups and the R&D groups and the manufacturing groups. But very often what happens is that we wind up as biologists in the boardroom when the management says, are there any models in the natural world, say, at an ecosystem level? How are ecosystems resilient? Why has one forest come back from a fire and retain its integrity? So we do a lot of now teaching at that level. That was a surprise to us, actually. We thought we'd come in and green a product, and what companies really wanted was to green their company. So now when we go to the out-of-the-box meeting at Interface, we might talk about marketing, or we might talk about how do you know, we might be talking to managers, not just the R&D team.
And indeed, in RMI, I'm always trying to use biological terms and patterns of thought, and we need another staff biologist. Maybe you can send us one to get us better at that. But for example, some of the simulations at the University of Wisconsin showed that when you build more power plants and power lines after a blackout, you're going to have more and bigger blackouts for exactly the same reason as if you suppress forest fires. You build up a huge fuel loading, and as soon as one gets away from you, you have this uncontrollable conflagration. Anybody who knows about forests understands that, but it's really news to the electricity business, because they're not used to biological metaphors at all. Mm-hmm. We're finding some interesting both opportunities and blockages. In our last $30 billion worth of industrial redesigns for radical efficiency, we're typically showing about 30 to 60% energy savings on retrofit with 2 or 3 year paybacks, which is a stunning result. And in the new facilities, we're saving more. It's often 40 to 90%, sometimes more, and the capital cost almost always goes down. Of course, we couldn't do that if the stuff had been designed right in the first place, which is why we're doing 10xe to overhaul how engineering is taught and done. But as a small example, some of you in the breakout may have heard about our new data center for EDS now, Hewlett-Packard. It's going live shortly in Britain. And it's going to produce about 4 times the expected amount of computing capability with 1/4 of the electricity, and it costs 10 or 15% less to build. Had they been able to do everything we recommended, they'd have saved about 95% of the electricity, still got 4 times the computing capability, and it would cost about half as much to build. Well, that revolutionizes that sector, much as our work with Paul Westbrook, I think, and later with some others has had a big effect on chip fabs. But there's a whole lot of sectors, and we've got to find better ways to scale than one company at a time, one sector at a time. Similarly, the solutions economy business model that Paul briefly alluded to, where both the customer and the provider make money the same way by doing more and better with less for longer. Well, this is quietly taking over in some sectors like chemicals. I remember when I first talked to the Ashland senior executives, biggest chemical distributor in the country, they'd never heard of this notion that, say, Dow had introduced, where instead of selling you a solvent, they lease you a dissolving service. But then the chemical industry set up a working party on it, and it's pretty much all over the place to sell the service instead of the tons. And then you get the chemical back and purify it and reuse it, and the more trips it makes, the less you lose, the more money you and your customer both make. It's spreading to other sectors, but we're still at an early stage of really systematizing where does a solution economy business model make sense, where does it not? And it has potentially profound implications that we start to glimpse with the Zipcar, Flexcar world, where, imagine that an oil or a car company of any of a dozen other actors starts providing a mobility and access service instead of selling you tons and gallons. You don't want to be late in that queue.
Great. Thanks, Amory. I want to shift direction a little bit, but I also have a logistical issue. I'm getting signs that we have 25 minutes, but we started 15 minutes late, so we're going to go till 10:15, just to let you know. And every now and then it is nice to be CEO. So I want to shift our discussion because we've been touching on it. But I guess I have a question. Are things going about the way they ought to? And the thought leaders are in place, and the right ideas are starting to get traction, and we should be following this through and letting it take its course? Or are we in deep trouble, things aren't working, we're upside down, and we ought to really make a big deal out of it?
Or both.
Or both.
There's that wonderful remark of Michael C. Muhammad who said something like, everything's going to turn out all right in the end. If it's not all right now, it's not the end yet. Just relax and keep going.
So Carl, how is your gut about that? Should we be pressing the big red button, DEFCON 5, or are things proceeding as they ought to?
I mean, in some ways, there are better experts than me, but layman's opinion about this is I think it's closer to what Amy said, that both things are true. There are thought leaders in place, there are great things happening, and it's not nearly on a scale that's going to make a big enough difference. There's things I see in the world that encouraged and discouraged by. So for example, 70 to 75% of our business is outside the United States. The reason why it's outside the United States is that's where 75% of the stuff in the world is being made. Yeah. It's where it's being designed and engineered. And so I think we can get a little too local and too US-centric about what's going on and thinking great things are happening. Now, I would say if I look at China, I have been amazed, delighted at how well the government has taken, and by the way, it's enlightened self-interest, as it often is in China, and government control has allowed them to have a serious dedication to energy efficiency, better utilization of resources. It's happening as well as it could for an economy of that size. I think there's phenomenal progress, and I think the people who talk about it disparagingly really don't understand what's going on there. I think on the other hand, you can look at a place like India. I think that one of the greatest tragedies that was totally underreported was an introduction of this $10,000 car that was an internal combustion engine. I mean, it's an awful thing to introduce. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, they're really successful. We just put 10 million cars on the road that are low quality automobiles where we had the opportunity to do something differently.
although it is more efficient than a Prius.
Yeah, and it's
And it's a
because
lot
it's small.
safer than having your whole family on a scooter, one scooter.
It depends what you want to preserve.
Yeah,
I
where
ju-
we're
I
going to
think-
put all those cars is another matter.
I think it's a tragedy, though. If it had been done at the right time and the right thing applied to it, we could have used it to scale other things that need that volume in order to be cost efficient. So I think there are things in the world that are great and we should be really proud of and thrilled about it. And I think big red buttons should be within arm's reach.
Still there.
You know,
Paul, how do you feel?
Oh, I'm so excited. I can't stand it. I mean, there's a friend of mine who says every time you argue with reality, you lose. And this is where we are. And so why bemoan it? It's just where we are. This is what the human condition has created. And I just, as a writer, I couldn't imagine a better script for the world. Because, Act 1, you introduce everybody, and then Act 2, by the end of Act 2, you're fucked, excuse me. I mean, and you have no idea how they're going to get out of it, And so you're there, you come back after an intermission, and it's like, what's going to happen, And so and that's where we are. And
What was that word again?
so I don't know why any of us expected that we would be further along at this point 10, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it's the way people learn, it's generational changes, there's the Kunzian paradigm thing, which is paradigms die, they don't change, And so I just see, I see the imminence of the data in terms of what it tells us as to how bad off we are. As being wonderfully provocative for the rest of the world. It's a very strong signal, and that signal is coming across. And I just think we're thinking arithmetically. We should be thinking exponentially in terms of change. Sometimes I'm sure you have, if you ever watched a flight of birds, a whole flock of birds, and then they change direction like that. Yeah. How? Watch it again.
Simple rules.
It's just a stunning kind of quality that we're organisms, have, to signal each other in a sense where you can have very, very rapid change. And the sluggishness of it is really...
Maybe that's happening now.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's happening now. I don't know when it's going to happen. Well, it could be. But
when we go outside.
Yeah,
it'll
we
all
go
be
outside.
different.
Yeah.
Well, as the search for intelligent life on Earth continues, there's
Yes,
a lot of
search-
promising specimens. coming
Exactly
out.
right. But I just see that underneath the radar, underneath the horizon, underneath the media just does such a disservice to this because it just reports the most frivolous green things and then ignores how really dire things are. So it really does a disservice to all of us in this country. But I mean, what we all see and what we haven't talked about here is what's coming, what's under the radar, and what people are doing. And it is so exciting. And will we make it, not make it, to me is just a great non-question because it's just an unanswerable and it doesn't matter. And it just screws you up if you think about it.
Amory.
There's so much going on under the surface. I think we all have the sense that there's a revolution going on in the boardrooms. And I want to share a story, since we're among friends, that if you're pressed, please treat as background, but it's quite exciting to me. When we published Natural Capitalism 10 years ago, within a few weeks, through an alert person in the Chinese embassy in London, a copy landed on the desk of Li Baohong, who is the #2 ideologist of the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing. And he read it, thought it was the greatest thing since boiled rice and just what China needed at this stage of her development.
Second biggest.
And that it resonated much more deeply than I'd realized with traditional elements of Chinese culture. So he came up with a brilliant title for it. I mean, this is one of the top guys in writing the slogans that shape the nation's mind. He's like an extraordinarily high-level ad executive. And he came up with a title that says in 5 characters exactly what we intended, ideology of or treatise on natural capital, but it also bows to Marx, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Capitalism, Environmentalism, Business Management Culture, and a couple other axes. Amazing title. He gets it translated by a crack team. He gets it published by his daughter's company, Shanghai Popular Science Press. He gets it launched by Mershi in Shanghai. He turns out to be a closet Taoist, by the way, very interesting guy. He doesn't tell me he's dying of leukemia. He dies 6 months later after the launch, and he has the book given to everybody at his funeral as his last legacy to China. Whereupon, his boss, the several years older, therefore in his early 80s, Tong Dalian, who's the top economist in China and retired as #1 ideologist of the party, takes up the cause and starts handing the book to the then and the later paramount leaders of China, every member of the state council and every provincial governor, saying, you must read this. And because of who he is, he knows everybody, has a huge reputation. Most of them read it, and then the Academy spends about 1.5 years vetting it, and they decide it's right. And I am told this has a lot to do with why energy efficiency in the 11th five-year plan, about 4 years ago, became China's top strategic priority for national development. Well, you know, we wrote the thing for American business leaders, not for Chinese Communist Party ideologists, but we'll take it. It's funny how these things happen, and we see a lot of this stuff going on that doesn't make the news, but is enormously encouraging when you see what kind of leverage it has.
I think that points to the fact that two things that excite me, and one is the diffusion of good ideas and the ability through IT and through the internet to make sure that they spread quickly and into the right hands. And I think humanity's on the lookout right now, right, for those good ideas. And there's no time that, obviously, no time like now that they can get to where they need to get to at the right time.
The hair's up on the back of my neck. We know there's a saber-toothed tiger out there.
That's
We're
right.
looking at trees.
We're looking, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think in probably any societal transformation, you've got the normal distribution to deal with, the bell-shaped curve. And at one end of that, you have the early movers, and then the fast followers. At the other end, you have the never movers. And then in between is the vast middle ground. And when the middle ground moves, then it's called mainstream. I think we're still in the stage of early movers and fast followers, frankly, and with a lot bubbling underneath the surface.
Although I think with the under the surface, for example, I would say when the Christian evangelical movement took on climate change as creation care, it's kind of like when the churches got into the civil rights movement, and that's the pivotal shift, and after that, it's the rest just has to play out.
But, you know, personally, I go back to a song we sang in Sunday school when I was 4 years old. And, you know, brighten the corner where you are. Brighten the corner where you are. Someone far from harbor, you may guide across the bar. Brighten the corner where you are. So I think, you know, if each of us brightens the corner where she or he is, and then make that corner as big as possible, then that's the way this all.
And we do that. It's not just grace; it's works. It's that. What St. Francis remarked, preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words.
With this thought, I'm brought back to Paul's comment about the flock of birds that suddenly shifts direction. And there's a spontaneity that's shocking about that. And I think that's what we're all here for. And I'd like to shift to questions, so that we can involve the audience in the discussion. But before we do, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to reflect just for a second and think about what is a signal that you're seeing that gives you hope. If you were just to pick something personal that you're seeing out there that gives you extraordinary hope.
For me, it's that our society has largely moved beyond a fearful funk. You know, a year ago, I had to use that Raymond Williams line about how to be truly radical is to make hope possible, not despair convincing.
Right.
I think we're well past that now.
So
The
you
whole
feel a
psychology-
cultural shift.
Yeah, the psychology of this country has shifted, and I think a lot of others with it.
Excellent. Carl, how about you?
I'd say two things. One is what I see in places like China and other parts, which will be inevitably the largest economies in the world, are doing more than I ever imagined. I think the second thing is what I see amongst the kids.
Yeah. I would say the democratization of innovation. I think that, I think it's not the means of production that are in everyone's hands, it's the means to invent. If you take something like the tools, that Autodesk does, you combine them with literally simple chemical recipes that can be shared, right? You combine them with things like rapid prototyping machines, the enabling technologies of innovation, do-it-yourself innovation that is going on. I think that's where, and it is suddenly incredibly cool to be innovating in the clean tech space. So I think at this moment, there are 1 million innovators on their computers, in their garages, but they're not making code, they're making stuff. I mean, I think the story of stuff is changing, and I think we're going to have distributed manufacturing and innovation, and they're going to be these small, innovative companies that are going to break through.
And as far as we know, there's nothing in the universe quite as powerful as 6 billion minds wrapping around a problem.
Yeah, with the means of innovation at their fingertips, which is why this information
and half
thing
of
is
them
so
women,
important.
most of them poor people who have not previously had much part of the global conversation, but now we're all getting hooked up with that global nervous
right.
system and
That's right.
the new social organization, Paul, that you described in Blessed Unrest.
That's right. And that's why it was so important. And Amory and RMI incubated Ask Nature, which is this database he talked about. We're trying to get the information from biology for free into innovators' hands at the moment they want it and need it. And Autodesk did funded that the big phase of it after RMI incubated it. And the idea there is, in the tool that somebody uses every day, they're able to get to say, how would nature do this? That sort of getting what you need at the moment you need it, at the moment of creation, is super important.
Thank you, Janine. Ray?
Yeah, in my mind, perhaps the single most important and encouraging thing that's happening is that the biggest dishonesty in the market is finally being addressed, about to be addressed. And this is putting a price on carbon. It doesn't exist today. Carbon gets a free ride. We say there's no such thing as a free lunch, and it's true. We pay for carbon every day, but we pay indirectly, and future generations will continue to pay. So getting a price on carbon so that an honest market can work honestly, to me, is the thing that will drive this fastest. When we level that playing field among all the technologies, and carbon bears its fair price.
Thanks.
And the more that happens, the better off your shareholders are.
Yeah. I think the two things, one is the Panic of '08, I thought was a great signal because it was like the Potemkin village of prosperity that, was put together with smoke and mirrors for decades, since World War II collapsed and still collapsing. And it really covered up really what true prosperity is. And true prosperity comes from sustainability. Sustainability and prosperity are the same word. And the idea that there were two different things, and you could be prosperous here, but sustainability was like a splinter movement, was really covered up by this financial capitalism, which is really about concentrating capital in the hands of a few people. The second thing really is youth. When I go to youth, which is that, I gave this commencement speech recently, and they took out the one paragraph that I thought was the most important, which I was talking to the kids themselves, and saying, look, I'm supposed to congratulate you, but I want to apologize, but because you're going to, the worst economy in, 70 years and 2 wars. But to their parents, I said, when you saw your kids, you're really surprised to be here, because when they were going to high school and they had their nose rings and tattoos and they were basically, doing their homework, listening to the iPod and probably back or something, and basically, texting and instant messaging while they're doing their homework, and purloining, music and studying FBI copyright laws by that. And you thought, they would never be here at this day, commencing, basically getting their degree, and this would be a good day to tell your kids that you never doubted them for a second. And we shouldn't doubt them either. And the thing is, when they were doing that, is they were doing things we call multitasking and say, oh God, that's so crazy. How can you do 3 things at once? Well, the way you heal a system, whether it's an immune system, an ecosystem, a social system, an economic system, is to connect more of it to itself.
Yeah, right. That's right.
And that's what's happening. And the system is connecting more of itself to itself in a myriad of ways, technologically, and the internet, digitally, and so forth, using software. And there's a brilliance that's coming out that, again, we really don't see, we don't, because it's diffused and it's dispersed as opposed to being concentrated and charismatic. And so that's what gives me great hope.
I got to mention that I'm really optimistic just to be able to see thinkers and leaders like this that are engaged with us and engaged with the world. And now we want to engage them with this audience. I want to make sure we have the microphones at the ready. And I'm going to make a request. We will take questions, and I want to request that they are questions. And please, please fight the impulse to speechify along with the panel. So let's go to the first question. And also, please say your name before your question. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Allison Wellsfree and Truth in Advertising. I just found out about Rocky Mountain Institute less than a month ago, so I'm thrilled to be here. I've heard about innovation and competition. I've got 2 questions. I'll try and make them very fast. Number 1, to RMI, is it possible on the 10x engineering to make some sort of engineering efficiency rating to inspire competition among engineering schools? Which one designs the most efficient buildings, cars, whatever the process is? Similar to ISO, could we create some sort of efficient engineering? And then the second one to Ray and to Carl on MBAs often study Geoffrey Moore's dealing with Darwin, innovate or die. It seems like that message needs to be coupled with this radical environmentalism that we're talking about. Is there any way to bring in the Geoffrey Moores of the world, the people that the MBAs are listening to move this, as you say, into the business sphere? Thank you.
We're not sure how yet, but we do want to get engineering schools innovating over who turns out the best radically efficient designers. And we are coming up with some sneaky tactics to create demand pull to get our casebook we're writing next summer into wide and rapid use. For example, deans of engineering schools, and we have some very distinguished ones involved, would start getting calls from the chief executives of companies that normally hire a lot of their students saying, sorry, we can't hire your students anymore unless you teach them in this new way, because otherwise they can't produce the breakthrough results we need. And the deans tell us, well, we've never had a call like that, but if we did, it would sure get our attention, and we would tend to change our pedagogy faster than the current time constant of 1 funeral at a time.
Carl, your thoughts about the second question?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if you look at where business school students study, the things they study, I mean, I think even more so maybe than Geoffrey Moore, stuff like Clayton Christensen and the stuff around disruptive innovation is really a perfect model for many of these kinds of innovations. I'll show my bias. I have more hope for the engineering students than the business school students, though.
Well, on the other hand, I do, several of us do speak at business schools, and typically there are students hanging from the rafters, although the faculty may not show up. But that's starting to change too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I just second that. I think it is happening already in the business schools.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, natural capitalism is used in many business schools.
Sure.
Yeah, most.
Clifton Lemon from Rumsey Engineers. So yay, I finally get to ask a question. I actually have 7 really big ones, but we're only going to do one right now.
Radical efficiency.
Yeah, so I want to share my biomimicry flash. A long time ago, I went to see that exhibit of plastinated bodies. If anybody's,
Yeah.
it's very strange stuff. And there was it was like a suit, and it was this human circulatory system, right? And I went, whoa, that's just like what we do with buildings. Thank you, Amory, for reminding everybody about the fat pipes, small pumps, because that's what we do every day when we engineer at Rumsey Engineers. So it's a great image to design buildings, and we, of course, use AutoCAD. And so my question is, to Carl, your people came to our office last week to talk about AutoCAD to get user experience and everything, but we have a really difficult software issue with integrating energy modeling into that product. Energy modeling in general is, in a difficult state right now, but I'm impatient. This is just a software battle. We don't need to be, messing around with proprietary stuff right now. We need to get a national standard for energy modeling in the software, just so that we can do the basic job of getting building performance, to the level that we can control it. Because architects are designing the way, we're concerned with the way buildings look, not how they perform. We're the people who do the performance stuff, and we have a really big problem with measuring energy in buildings right now on the ground. So what would it take to get a national standard for energy modeling on a software level?
So I'd say a couple things, but I know Amory and others have been involved in the same thing. So a couple things. I'm happy to tell you more specifically about how we do it. You can find me afterwards, and I'll give you more details about it. I think that I'm desperately in search of a national standard so we can actually measure, so we can take buildings from what right now I feel is like a checklist approach to energy efficiency. If you do this, and you get a number of dots or stars or little apples for doing it, to actually measuring the performance of buildings. I would love to get a national energy standard. One of the things I'm most interested in is, first of all, being able to predict the usage of energy ahead of time. And then secondly, holding people accountable by measuring it afterwards. And I think it's the combination of those two things that are really important. I think not only is there not an energy standard, we don't ask people to model it beforehand, yet we're willing to give them, in cases, millions of dollars to do it, and we don't measure the results afterwards, and we don't correlate it.
And we don't pay our architects and engineers for what they save, we pay them for what they spend. That's dumb and we should fix it. So we've done 5 experiments on performance-based design fees, and with those tools, we can make those work.
Yep.
You mentioned the circulatory system. Jay Harmon says, I don't know if it's exactly the right number, but there's 160 kilometers of blood vessels in your body. So if our blood flowed the way fluids flow in our industrial and building piping systems, you would need a heart bigger than your body because there'd be so much friction. Fortunately, nature's figured out laminar vortex flow, which is, of course, what the PAC's biomimetic rotors use to revolutionize how we pump fluids very efficiently.
And that's, that image you have of the circulatory system is really interesting. Here's how biology meets plumbing design in buildings and meets Autodesk CAD, because
You ever see right-angle bends in your circulatory system?
No, you don't. And it branches. And what's interesting is that there's a single mathematical algorithm at the basis of branching in lungs, branching in roots, branching in branches, branching in tree veins, branching in your arteries. And it's called Murray's law. And it's that the pipes start at a certain diameter, and when they branch, they step down. And when they branch again, they step down. And they step down by a certain percentage. No matter where you look in the natural world, that algorithm is the same. What if you could put that algorithm into an Autodesk software, and you could begin to create a circulatory system in a building skin that looked like that, literally branching and at that right level of step down? It turns out to be the most efficient way to deliver fluids or gases to a 3-dimensional space. And we're at the point now where we could model that. Mm-hmm. Now, talking to the standards people about that sort of a plumbing, I mean, that's a whole nother level.
Yeah, you lose them at
Breaking
veins, don't you?
Well, you would probably have to, drop that talk out and do outcome.
You lose them in rigidity. That's rigidity, flexibility. That's what you lose.
Yeah.
We were looking at an airport HVAC system a few days ago and talking about how they could engineer out most of the bends and even run some pipes diagonally through the air. And the engineer said, well, not only is that against the spec, which requires orthogonal piping, the code requires orthogonal piping. The building inspector wouldn't accept it. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Next. Let's go right back there if we could. Oh. Okay.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm Kate Reimer. I graduated in 2008 from Berkeley with many other fellow environmentalists and some ex-environmentalists. Paul, I loved your speech. I'm glad that the Earth is hiring. I sent it to my ex-environmentalist friend trying to convert her back. It's almost too much to bear, looking forward, and I think that's why she kind of left the environmentalists. She figured, we only have so much time left, let's just have a big party. But so my question to you, Paul, is how are you going to change the canon of macroeconomic thought? I studied economics, and when I was going through my macroeconomics program, I would ask my professor, well, what about resources? And what about capital? And I was always an annoying kid. And he would say, well, sure, that's one alternative. You could study land. There are some models that account for land in the macroeconomic picture. But that was as much information as I ever got from him. I studied ecological economics in a completely different department. And I have to say, that was one of my most frustrated professors I ever met. So how are you going to incorporate concepts like thermoeconomics and get away from Keynesian economics in the traditional canon of thought? Thanks.
Well, Bill McKibben says, that he thinks that the laws of Congress will not trump the laws of physics, and I think the same thing holds true with economics, which is, economics to me is a form of brain disease, and it will persist in the same way that many belief systems persist, but its effectiveness. I think was really brought out, and there's some really interesting articles on what happened the last 18 months in the economy about, modeling and macroeconomics and theory, which is like, But I feel that and there's that great phrase about economists, what's that thing about staying up all night worrying about their...
Oh, yeah,
the
economists are the folks who lie awake at night worrying about whether what works in practice can possibly work in theory.
Yeah. And it's really kind of an upside down profession, in my opinion. And so I don't really try to convince economists of anything. I feel like if we direct our attention to economists, to the federal governments, and to the tops of hierarchical concentrations of power, whether it be intellectual, economic, or otherwise, I feel like we're really going to be frustrated. And I just feel like there's so much going on now that is lateral, that doesn't require that either the permission of or the sanctioning. And there's still this kind of quality of like looking to Washington, looking to Obama, looking to DOE, and I just think we've got to give all that stuff up, And if they can do it and help, fine, but the idea that somehow if we change the top, if something happens in Copenhagen, yeah, we're going to make it. That's not, I just don't believe that's true.
This is the age of end runs.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the question is, how do we make these links between each other, what we do? And again, it does go back to software and to information and to IT and what works is going to prevail, and what is not working is really what kind of is just in our face every day. And I just feel like good news doesn't go very far in the media, but it goes a long ways in terms of being effective. So. Kate, I love giving that talk to you guys, and I love to talk to that person who dropped out. I'm curious to know what she's doing now. She's not an environmentalist, but I really feel that, you know, I called my first company Erewhon because of Samuel Butler wrote this book, you know, and it was, Erewhon is an anagram from nowhere is backwards. And in Erewhon, there was the Colleges of Unreason, and you went there to learn to speak a language that only people in the Colleges of Unreason could understand and no one else could, you know. And I remember my economics professor saying, when I, you know, defining Gresham's law, I'd say, okay, now how would you explain this to your grandmother? And if you couldn't tell her and she couldn't understand, you didn't know what you were talking about. And so I just want to urge you to not to worry about macroeconomics. They will, you know, one coffin at a time. And there's a new vital group of people coming up beyond even ecological economics.
Your friend sounds like a young lady I had in a college class recently who had said, you know, all the suffering in the universe, terrible things happening in the world, I can't possibly bring a child into this world. And we got to talking about how she said she'd lost hope, and it turned out she hadn't lost it at all. She knew exactly where she left it.
I think we have time for one more brief question.
Eric, you know, what you hear today, I think, and especially the story about the forklift driver and the need for change, both in the environment and then what's happened with our economy and maybe the need to reinvent capitalism. Do any of you have a sense that using like open book management and kind of the jack stack approach, could you use that to leverage the change that we're talking about, both in the environment and how you treat your employees? I don't know if that's clear or not.
Well, we're talking about not the world of design, but the design of the world, and one of the ways you design the world is open book management of the world.
And are you referring to the idea of applying those principles toward the natural impacts of a business? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Mostly about using open book management to business, you know, and you know, maybe not everyone knows what that is, but you know, to leverage this change, because what I hear Ray say and the forklift driver is you know, they have become the change agents within internally, and it's actually made them much more profitable. But it's using those two concepts, because we do need to change. We need to reinvent capitalism.
Yep.
We already know that. And so can we combine those two, assuming that there's a, you know, you understand what I mean by open?
It's a great question. And Ray, could you comment on...
I'm not sure I do understand the question. I'm sorry.
So let me frame it and tell me if I got it right. It's that, does this kind of consciousness or different way of doing business require a completely different level of communication and openness with your staff? And does that release a lot of energy?
Absolutely, yeah.
Did I get that right in general?
Yeah. We spent a lot of time in our company in getting our people to open up their minds to change, to let go, you know, the past, let go the old ways, let go the status quo. The status quo is an opiate, you know, get rid of it and embrace change and play to win rather than not to lose. And so a lot of cultural immersion exercises that we went through with our people to open them up to this. And without that change of mind, nothing lasting happens. In our own plan to climb this mountain, one face of the mountain is sensitizing all of our stakeholders, our people, our customers, our suppliers, even the communities in which our people come and where we operate. As Einstein said, you know, we won't solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. So we've got to move to new thinking, absolutely.
And Ray, having been at Interface a few times, I am amazed by the openness and candor of all the staff. Would you say that's a value that you...
Absolutely. Transparency is a huge value. You go to our website, you'll see it all, you know, warts and all. And yeah, openness, candor, people free to say what they think. Absolutely.
That's great.
Empowerment depends on that.
I wanted to back that up. I think that businesses have to be open systems, and that means, but the technology is here to do that with now too, in terms of, you know, blogging and sharing stuff. There's a great, we're in the solar business. We watched NanoSolar came out with a really great announcement a couple weeks ago, but it's really interesting to see the CEO's blog. I mean, it's so, it's all out there, everything. Yeah. And then you compare that to some of his competitors who are just like this, you know, and so we, at our company, you know, we say, okay, you guys choose the vacations, you know, whatever, any 10 you want. Then I read about Chipotle, and the guy says, We don't even choose the vacations. You decide how many vacation days you're going to take. And I think, oh, what a great idea. That's what we're going to do next, which is like, hey, you guys work
But we're
hard.
not doing that at RMI, just for the record.
I think it's a really good idea because,
Why not?
It's what Jack Stack did, which is basically you set your own pay scale, but you see what everybody else is paying.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting feedback loops. And again, it goes back to connecting a system to itself. And a business is an organism, it's a system. And the more information people have about what's happening in real time, the more they can connect it to itself and become more intelligent.
And again, driving out fear.
Yeah, and driving out fear, yeah.
Good.
And don't be afraid to risk failure.
Well, encourage it.
Yeah, we have to expect and reward a reasonable level of failure, and if we're not achieving that level, we're not taking enough risk to learn fast enough.
The great speaker, Ben Zander, says when something really goes wrong, he says, oh, how fascinating.
Well, and with that note, we need to bring this discussion to a close. Please join me in thanking our speakers.